give the lecture for today. So before we start the lecture, so again, let's have a look at what we have learned and we are going to learn. So till now so you may have noticed that the first half of this course is quite like content heavy. Like you learned a lot of stuff so far. So you learn about JavaScript, you learn TypeScript, you learn about how to use Git. We also learned pipeline and also a lot of testing. But from this week, like from this lecture, we are going to have less complicated new stuff. So still very important, very interesting contents about software engineering fundamentals, but you feel like you get a little break. So a lot of things that we are going to talk from this lecture on, like will be building on top of what we have learned in the first 4 weeks, and it will kind of get a relief. And you are going to practice what you have learned so far in the project iterations, but you feel that the project is getting a little bit harder, like comparing with iteration 0 and 1, but there will be less new content. So this is how and why this course is designed. Like we need to give you the basic stuff that you need to get those content learned so that you can start building your project. Okay, so today we will talk about persistence. And we'll leave iteration to next lecture, so Wednesday lecture. So the reason is that we hope that you can come with your, have a meeting with your team, read the iteration 2 spec, have an overall understanding of what iteration 2 is about, and then we are going to have a lecture talking about iteration 2, so that you may have some questions prepared before coming to the lecture, instead of like we released the spec yesterday and then we talk about iteration 2 today, so that you can get some preparation before we're talking about iteration 2 in the lecture. So today, other than persistence, we will talk about exceptions, and hopefully we can also do some like designing for maintainability, so that the Wednesday lecture will be like 2 hours focusing on iteration 2. So get you prepared for the iteration 2. So that's the basic idea and what we are going to talk about this week. So first of all, the first lecture today is about persistence. So anyone knows or can like want to have a guess like what is persistence in a software project or in a software product? Like any guess? Yeah. Store something for a long time. That's perfect. How did you know that? Guys, yeah, that's absolutely correct. So storing something for longer time. So why we introduce persistence in this course? So thinking about your iteration 1, that you've been working on some functions or features like that can help your users register for an account, right? But we are not storing this data anywhere. So that when a user comes to our platform, comes to our hat, and they register onto hat, and then when they come back again the other day or next time, they need to register again, right? Because we are not storing this kind of data, there are like credential data anywhere. So we need a way to store our data for longer time. Right. So this is relevant to data. So this is some like recap of what you learn in high school or other courses. So data can be some like anything. So for example, this text on the slide is a kind of data, right? Or you may play with spreadsheet before or Excel before, right? So those kind of information on the Excel or spreadsheet, they are all data. But from data, like when we have a bunch of data, we can extract some insights from this data. So for example, the recommendation system, right? So they are insights coming from a lot of data. But this is not what we are going to focus on in this course, like big data or data analyzing. So that will be like some other courses like 3311 or others. But we, in this course, we will talk about like very basic, like the most essential but not quite complex type of data like we need to store for our software product. So the examples, like other than for register and login again, so this kind of example. So other example may be So have you ever used a subscription on YouTube? Yeah. So this is also a kind of data that we need to store in our software, right? So you subscribe to this channel, and next time when you open your YouTube, there will be some recommendations, some new videos from this channel and others. So these are also data that we need to store in our software products. And others like, for example, when you use Instagram, like you may notice that different people use Instagram, like they got different recommendations, right? So these are all because they store some of your history data and they know what your interests are. So these are data in our software. So one part of this course, we talk about like full stack, like we are designing full stack software. And one critical part of a full stack software is this data layer. Can you see clearly from the back? Yeah? Okay, all good. Yeah, so this is the data layer. So data layer is where we store this kind of data, like the examples that we gave. And there are also other layers that use the information of the data from our data layer. For example, the interface layer. So what is an interface layer? Like, where's the button? What color is that button? What kind of text is showing on that button? Or like whatever you can see, right? So those are like the interface layer. For example, this click on my slide, those are like something on the interface layer. And the business layer is like, for example, I click on this button, it will lead me to the next page. And when I click on the other button, it will lead me to another slide. Right? So this is what's happening in the business logic layer. It's like an interface layer and business logic layer, they are both related to the front end. Like you do something, like interact with any software, interact with any platform, and they show you something different. So those two layers are relevant to the front end. Well, the service layer and the data layer are what is in the back end. So the service layer is actually what we have done in iteration 1, so some functions. Right, so those are the service, what is doing in the service. So maybe have some algorithms, maybe have some functions, and those are in the service layer. And data layer is what is stored, what kind of data is stored, like how they are stored. And those two layers are in the back end. And for this course, we are mainly building the back end. And we gave you a front end, like already coded front end, and you will learn how to make the front end make your back end work with the front end, so that you can have a full stack software at the end of this course. Right. So we have learned a lot in the service layer, like how the functions that we wrote, and now we are going a little bit further to the data layer from this lecture. And also you can see from this column, other than the data layer, all of the three other layers are stateless. What is state? What is your understanding of state? What is the state of a software? The state of software, for example, is, you can think of like the current status of your software. So this is the state of my current slide. Right, and and they are stateless. So I'm not sure whether you remember, like when you have a very low internet connection, and when you refresh your Instagram or YouTube, there will be some columns showing on the app with no contents in that. Right, so those are stateless, and what is shown actually in those boxes actually getting from the data layer. And the data layer has the kind of data. Yeah, and those are the state of your software. And how can we store data in this data layer? Or data layer, we often call it database. So it's a more commonly heard term, it's called database. So what is in the data layer is the database. And there's a lot of different types of database. And the three main ways to store data are like, the first one is in memory. In memory data is like, so in memory data is the data, for example, variables. Like when you call a function, there are some variables in that, right? So those kind of data that for those variables are stay in memory only. Like when you restart your app or when you call that function again, those kind of information is doesn't exist any longer, right? So those kind of data is stored in memory only, and that is not persistent, meaning that when you restart the app, when you get a power cut, those kind of data is lost, right? So that is in memory. But in memory data can sometimes be also be helpful, like also use in some cases like other than the variables in our functions, but also in like stock market. Like when the data is changing very fast, like in the stock market data, so in that case, they store that data in memory because it can be refreshed very quickly and reflect the change very quickly. So this is the benefit of storing data in memory. And also in some games, like some video games that you play, you may have a leaderboard, right? So that kind of leaderboard data is also used in memory storage because they can refresh very quickly. The other way of storing data is storing data in a file. So maybe you have used OneDrive, used some other like cloud file system. So those are actually file-based database, but they are not used for software product. But you are storing your data in a file, maybe an Excel, maybe a Word document, maybe a Google Doc, right? So this is in file database. And this is actually what we are going to introduce in this course, like how we can store our data for our software projects in a file. And this is very easy to do. It's not very complex, but it also has some like both pros and cons. The pros is that you can have some logic around, not logic, some layers for your file. So for example, you may have one file in this folder, another group of files in another folder. And you may have another like top level folder like contains both of the folders, right? So you can have this kind of layers for your data. And you can also set this, different kind of security of privacy constraints to the different folder. For example, this folder's files or data is more private. We need to have like stronger privacy security protection for that folder, but the other folder is okay. But you can also share the data the data in different folder with different people or different software products. So this is the pros of in-file database. But the con is that you cannot have complex relationship between the data because you are just storing the data in like a string format. So you cannot have a like very complex relationship between different kind of data. For example, this user's password is matching with the username. So this kind of data is enough for in-file database. But if you have more complex in a large software system, so they may have very complex relationship to each other. So in-file database may not be enough. In that cases, you may need some SQL. Databases that you will learn in the 3311 course. Yeah, and we will not cover that in this course, like this is software engineering fundamentals course. So as you move down this list, the barrier to entry becomes higher, it becomes more and more complex, but the performance is also getting better and better. Yeah, sorry, because online students are asking us to be quiet in the audience because they cannot hear. What about now? Ask them what about now? Okay. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so this is like what persistence means. So persistence means that we want to store this data longer in our database. So persistence basically means that when program state outlives the process, maybe you have a power cut, maybe you restart your system, the data can still be there. Like, for example, the user's registration data. And persistence for software products can be interpreted very broadly, but in this course, we'll just define it to store data to our disk. Okay, so now is the question, like more relevant to our projects or any software projects. So how can we modify our project server to persistently store data? So for example, user registration data. So how can we store this data? Yeah?
Use the JSON file?
In a JSON file. Yes, that's correct. So when we introduced the JSON file a couple of weeks ago, we mentioned that JSON file is the data interchange type, right? So interchange data type. And it's very powerful, like when we want to store some data from our program in that file so that it can be retrieved for other purposes in the future, right? So this is how we can store data in a file. So we can change it to a JSON file, like a JSON string, and store this JSON string in a JSON file, and later we can read from that JSON file. Okay, so let's have a look at what we have learned in the previous lecture when we talk about JSON. Okay, so this was the example that we used in the week 3 lecture, like when we introduced the JSON file. So we mentioned that when we want to read or write with a JSON file, we need a library called FS. So this is the library is the one that we use to read and write with JSON file. And then we may have a data, maybe an object like JavaScript object, maybe an array. So here maybe the user data or the what was that, like user store or data store, right, in iteration 1, right? So this is maybe your data store, and you may have some data in that, and then we JSON stringify this data store object, and this data will become a JSON string. So this is recap, like what we have learned before. And then we can use fs.writeFileSync and write this data to export.json, but it can be different. It's just the file name, the JSON file name that you want to write this data to. So maybe for this case, maybe the data store, was that data store? .json, right? So in this way, you can write your data into a JSON file, and it will be stored in the file, like in your folder, in your project. You can, and then you can use maybe like git add push to push your the data, the JSON file into your GitLab repository, and it will be there forever before you change or delete that. Right. So very simple. So as you can see that from this lecture, the contents will become much more and more easier. So this is basically how we can store that data in JSON file, and also we can use the same way to read this data. So when you have new user registered for your Kahoot, you write their registration information in this data store.json file, and then you can also read that file when a user want to log in, right? So when a user want to log into your Kahoot or Phuket, and then you can compare their login information with what is stored in this data store.json file. Right, so basically you can just use like fs.readFileSync, and then JSON pass this JSON into a data. So data is the JavaScript object. So you can use the information from this data object. That's it. So very simple. Right. So in your project, you may want to do something more. So in iteration 1, you had the data store, the object, and you also had a function called admin org register, right? So when a new user register in your cool hat, you push a new user's information to this data store. And now you may want to have a function maybe called save. Oh, sorry. This is a save function, and maybe we can define this save function. I'm not going to write a functional script, but just show you the overall flow, like how you can save the data in a JSON file and then how you can read that. So how can we save it? Just here, you can just copy here, put it here. So this is how we save the data. Right, so it's not data structure, it should be data store, right? So this is like whenever a new user registered to call this save function, and what's in this save function is just save this data store in your file, right? And then what else should we do? Is this it? Yeah, I think this is it, like when we want to write to this file. However, you may also want to read from this file, right? Like when a user wants to log in and you want to read from this file, so you can just use, yeah. So can comment here. So you read from this JSON data store.json file, and then you JSON parse that into data store, and then you can use this data store later. Right. But before you do that, maybe for the first time you store your data store in this JSON file, there's no this data store.json file yet. So you may want to add some more logic to check whether this file exists already, right? So if the file doesn't exist already, you need to just write to this file, that'll be fine. And if the file exists already, you need to read from this file first, and then when calling the admin aux register, like when some change to this data store, you just update that, and then write to data store.json file again. All right. Yeah, I think it's, yeah, question.
So just for the persistence layer, we need to have one file for that.
The question was, if we want to have a persistence layer, we need to add this one file, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so yes. So for this single purpose, like we want to store the user's registration information, then you only need one file to store the user's registration information. But if you want to store other things, you may want to have another file.
So would that be recommended for iteration 2?
Iteration 2, yes. So iteration 2 will require you to add a persistence layer to store this data store information. Oh, sorry, I'm having a very bad headache. So sometimes you may see me in a very ugly face. It's because I'm having a headache. Sorry about that. It's not because I'm not happy with you, just my headache. Oh, good. Any other question? Yeah, all good? Yeah, you can see it's not very hard. It's quite straightforward. Let me check if any question online. Yeah, all good. Let's go back to our slides. Yeah, so project iteration 2 will be adding a persistence layer, but it's not hard. It's pretty easy and quite straightforward. And you won't be asked to add a very complex database like SQL database. Just file-based database will be more than enough for this course. And you can also experience having a data layer in a software project without introducing too much complexity. Yeah, oh, sorry. So this is basically the process, like because we have learned HTTP server now. So the process is that when the server starts, we open this JSON file and set the global variable to be passed to the... Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Sorry. Thank you. This is so helpful. I didn't sleep well for the past couple of nights, and this morning when I wake up, it's just very bad headache. Thank you. Thank you. And then, we will have a timer in the project. So maybe based on timer, like after a couple seconds, and then or at the end of every root call, like you save this kind of data in your JSON file. And the way that we store is just store it in a file. So this is the process. It's not too much conflict. That's it.